Yes, sir. We're live. Greetings,
Welcome,
everybody. How
welcome to
you doing?
welcome to the Gullah House Show. I'm Baba Kimo, Chief Elder of the Gullah Nation of North America, along with my co-host from Sierra Leone, West Africa, Chief Master Fode Ajamu, Chief of the Gullah Nation of North America. Be sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Also, check out our Ganona website and check out our Tools and Seeds operations. We appreciate your support. Today,
Absolutely.
today we have a
Uh,
special guest.
yes, we do. Yes,
He's
we do.
he, he studied here at South Carolina State University in Orangeburg. He's a griot. He's a historian. He's a storyteller. He's the keeper of the torch. Please welcome my brother Wayne O'Brien.
Brother Wayne, Baba Wayne, bringing him in right now.
But good
Greetings,
morning.
greetings, Baba. How you doing?
Greetings.
Man,
Hello,
it's
brother
great.
Wayne.
How's it going? Greetings.
So
Yes,
so
sir.
so so tell us who is Wayne O'Brien and when and what does he do?
Okay, well, Wayne O'Brien was born in Charleston, South Carolina, uh, in 1960, which was, of course, the middle of the Civil Rights Movement. And but my early education, what actually started me on this journey, was very early on. I had a great grandmother who both of her parents had been born, in slavery, and but she was a college graduate. She graduated from Allen University in 1912,
Mhm.
and she began teaching in 1914. Even though we lived in downtown Charleston, my great grandmother was a principal on James Island, which is one of the Gullah Geechee Islands, Sea Islands. My grandmother taught on Johns Island, and my grandfather was a principal at on Mount Pleasant, which is on the other side of Charleston. But all of this is Gullah culture all around. So I was actually kind of in and out of a number of different Gullah Geechee communities all my life. So in 19 probably 63 is when my great grandmother began to teach me Black history. And the reason she did it, she was a educator from 1914, then she retired in 62. I lived right across the street. So here was this baby about a year and a half old, and this senior, elder who had just retired, been teaching almost 50 years. Now she didn't have a job to go to teach that community, but she had this baby across the street. So, even though my mom and my grandparents were all educators, in the morning, my mother would get up to go and teach school, and she would leave me with a babysitter. And one day, my mom forgot something and turned back around to go get it. And when she got to the house, the babysitter was sleeping and I was gone. So she thought I got kidnapped. So the babysitter had to finally give up the gig. She said, every day when your car turns the corner, your grandmother comes over here and takes the baby and tells me I might as well go to sleep because I'm keeping him. And then she would bring me back before my mom got home. But my mom said, well, you might as well just keep it, instead of me paying a babysitter. And
Yeah.
so as early as I can remember, my great grandmother would take me on these walks. She would be walking for her exercise, and I was just, her companion. And halfway through the walk, which is where the Charleston Museum was located, we would sit on the bench, and she would tell me, "Baby, I have to teach you your history because when you go to school, they're not going to teach it to you there." I've
Wow.
been in the school system, for close, half of a century, and I know what they're teaching there, and they don't teach our history. So she
Mm.
began to take me around to different sites in Charleston. Charleston's like a living museum, and she would tell me the Black history story of each of these sites. And so
Mm.
by the time I got into school and started studying, whether it was South Carolina history or United States history, I noticed those gaps that were missing. But I
Right.
was actually sitting in the class plugging them in, plugging her stories into the gaps. So I was getting this big picture of, African American history as it relates to, the United States and North America and actually the whole, this side of the Atlantic
Mhm.
because I was taught from her. She was taught from her elders And the community actually that she actually taught in, if you're familiar with, U.S. history, on James Island, that's where the
Mhm.
first shots were fired that started the Civil War. They were
Mhm.
fired from Fort Johnson on to Fort Sumter, and that started the Civil War. And of course, the Civil War led to the end of the slave system. But my great grandmother's school was on Fort Johnson Road. Her school was maybe a mile, if that far, from the site of the first shots. When she was
Wow.
teaching the children in that community, the parents and the grandparents had never had an opportunity to go to school. So there was a problem with that. If y'all might be familiar with Septima Clark, the grandmother of the civil rights movement.
Sir.
She was
Yes,
one of
Yes.
sir.
my grandmother's best friends and kind of co-workers. They were working those sea islands. And what they would do is they would teach the adults in the evening because it was a dual purpose. The adults couldn't help the kids with any homework because they didn't know this stuff. And because kids were learning what the grandparents and the parents hadn't learned, they didn't want the kids to get a big head. Like I'm smarter than you. And of course, y'all know that would have caused some severe repercussions
Yeah.
from the elders. But
Yes.
it gave them a sense of pride when they learned, and it also was setting them up because they were setting the stage for the civil rights movement when they were teaching them how to read and write, that they could go and deal with registering to vote and things like that. But when they would teach those elders, lessons that they didn't get in school, the elders were actually teaching them the oral history of what they had seen and what they had witnessed. Because, a lot of people were still out of that slave system and still alive. And they were actually present when the black troops came through to liberate those islands.
Mm-hmm.
So my great
Mm-hmm.
grandmother was actually giving me almost 200 years of oral history handed down to her. And like I said, I
Mm-hmm.
was barely walking. I was in that movement since the time I was marching before I was walking. And they were, and so there's three generations of these educators. My mother was actually the first black professor at the Citadel,
Oh wow.
and the Citadel, which was a military college, all
Yeah.
male and all white, and they
Right.
hired a black woman to be the first person. This was in 1972, and of course, the Citadel has a connection to Denmark Vesey, who
Right.
planned the largest slave revolt in history of the United States. Denmark Vesey's house was three doors down from where I lived. I played in his house. The place where he was hung was outside of my kindergarten window. The
Yes,
place
sir.
where he was imprisoned was across from my elementary school. And so this guy who had done all this stuff, 100 years earlier, my great grandmother told me the story about him, but she would take me to the sites, where all these things happened and tell it to me. So she was making these things come alive to me. And once I got into school, the teachers were telling me one thing, the books were telling me one thing, and my great grandmother told me something else.
Mm.
Now, who y'all think I was going to believe? You
Grandma.
know,
Your
yeah, I
grand.
believe my great grandmother, because see, my great
Mm-hmm.
grandmother was every bit as qualified as they were.
That's right.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, more, because in those early years when they first started teaching, a lot of those teachers didn't even need degrees, to teach, especially the white teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And the black teachers who had degrees, and they started getting their masters earlier than the white teachers because the white teachers didn't need
Mm.
them. And in Charleston, there was a law that if you were married, you couldn't teach in the city. You had to teach on the sea islands. And
What?
they ended up fighting that in the NAACP because they didn't want that image of a married, successful. Because usually, if you're married and the wife was working, the husband's usually working too. And that was my great grandmother. Her husband owned his own business, but that would show those kids in Charleston this nuclear family that was together, where everybody was upwardly mobile and achieving. They didn't want that image. They only wanted single women to teach in the
Mm-hmm.
city, so that those
Mm-hmm.
children would never see a married woman in their classroom. And now there's for different reasons because my great grandmother, they were fortunate because the elementary school where her children went was right across the street from the house. But that meant that if you were married and you had a family, we're going to make you travel to teach.
To teach.
because that means you're going to have to either choose your family or your job,
For your
because you're going to
job.
have to leave before the kids go to school, which means that they're not going to, yet can't be there to feed them their breakfast and get them off. And then the kids are going to get home before you do. And that if you're, if you're going through this, your children might be in the street and things like that. So you had to have a community that said, hey, look, you go on and take, because you're doing this for the whole community. You go ahead and do what you got to do. We'll make sure the kids get off. And when they come home, they come here, we'll have something for them with our children. So that whole community would take care of everybody. And since the school was right across the street, she had 3 young children. They could just walk straight up to the school. And then also what helped her was that her husband had a feed store that he owned, and it was right on the corner. So he was still close by. Now he passed when they were relatively young, but all those different dynamics came together to allow them to do what they did. What Septima Clark and all those guys would do is they had a community that always supported, especially teachers, black teachers, to make sure that y'all can do what you have to do. We'll pick up the slack for you. And so in the 50s, there was a state law that you couldn't go to those white universities to get your advanced degrees. And to keep them out, they said, if you want one, we'll pay for it, but you have to go out of state. And so the ladies in our neighborhood, they would go out, they would apply at a white school for a degree that a black school didn't offer on purpose. They had the catalogs from Claflin and State and Allen and all that. And then they had the catalogs from USC and Clemson. And they would tell all the ladies on the block, y'all need to pick a major that the black schools don't offer and the white schools do. Because the
Right.
way the law was written, if they couldn't get it to you at the black school, they would have to pay for you to go out of state. And then those ladies would go out one semester. My grandmother would go to New York University, and the ladies in the neighborhood say, hey, when your husband comes home, don't worry, we got him. We'll have his food ready for him. When the kids come home, we'll take care of that. And then my grandmother would come back home, and then another lady would go the next semester, and they would do that for her. And they would swap out until every lady on that block that was teaching had their master's degrees. And
Wow.
when we would go to house, we always saw these graduation pictures of all those ladies that looked exactly alike because they had all went to New York University. And see, think about this now. If you go to New York University, you're not just going to that school, you're going to that culture
Yeah,
in New
yeah,
York. And
yeah. That's
so
right.
we're getting an extra education just by being there. And so that little community that they had, it benefited. That's why I couldn't help but do what I do, because I came out of that community. And back then the whole community would raise you. You know,
That's powerful. That's
so
very,
that's
very.
kind of, now you see why I do what I do. I don't think I could escape it,
Yeah,
and I didn't
absolutely.
want to. You know,
Wow. Wow. I don't even know what to say, man. I'm blown away because, like you said, this you third, fourth generation
right?
carrying on the knowledge,
And
and
teaching my
being
children,
educated.
yeah, and I'm teaching my children, Black history, not the ones that's in
Absolutely.
the book, but the things that you had to learn outside of the books. And I've got a 2-year-old grandbaby that I've been taking around since he was born, because I realized how early this stuff can stick with you, because my great grandmother took me around, when I was first born. So I know that there are things that is going to stick with him that he'll start to recall later on, as long as I expose him to it.
Right.
That's exactly what happened to me when I was coming up. My
Yeah,
mother raised me in the same kind of environment and everything. I come out of that same culture. It's continuous.
right. Let me tell you
Uh,
another interesting thing. Y'all know the story of Lorenzo Dow Turner, right? The
yes,
guy, the
sir.
father of the Gullah
Yes, sir.
American language. Matter
Yeah.
of fact, see, I got this is his book here, the Africanisms in the Gullah Geechee, and this is
Yes,
actually
sir.
signed by his wife. He had already passed at the time, but when he did his research on the Gullah language being African Creole language, he actually came down to Johns Island, 1929. Because this is the story. He's a linguist, so he's trained. And he was teaching a summer job at South Carolina State.
In Orangeburg.
And while he was at South Carolina State, he heard two young ladies speaking to each other, and in Gullah. And so he asked the other students. He said, "What language are these girls speaking?" And of course, at South Carolina State, because this is what they did to me, they said, "That's just the Geechee girls," you know. And he said, "No, that's a language. See, that's a dialect." And so he asked the girls. He said, "Can I? Do y'all mind when y'all go home for the weekend? Can I come to your community?" And I just want to come down there and talk to some of the elders. And they said that was fine. So he went down there. So he was down there on James Island and Johns Island. But he took recording material and all the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and he started recording those ladies. So see, my great grandmother was the principal of the school, one of the schools that was in the community. So she was there when Lorenzo Dow Turner came down.
Oh,
And
wow.
being a principal in certain communities, you were kind of central, to those communities because they called her the second mother of that community. Well, when this stranger comes down with all this equipment, these people aren't exactly, open because they don't know what he's coming for. He could be the feds or something, coming down there to spy on them about,
You
because the
never know.
communities, they kind of closed. They weren't really open to a lot of outsiders coming in. So he would have to talk to people like my grandmother and other people in the community, tell them what he was doing, and let them tell the people it was all right to even talk to him. So while he was down there doing his work, this is 1929, uh, her and other people like her were down there. And of course, what he did is he found the connection of the African words, thousands of them, that migrated across the water, coming out of different African nations, but the majority in Charleston was out of Sierra Leone area or the Grain Coast because of
Mm-hmm.
Charleston rice. And so he's the guy who made that connection. But like I said, some of the things that I was privy to because of her, she was giving me a lot of very firsthand information. And that's the roots of really discovering that African connection to the Gullah Geechee corridor.
That's powerful, man. That's a very powerful testimony. First of all, because to have an organic intergenerational historian, to be able to pass it on the way that you
Right,
got it, also throw your analysis and your experience there is really a diamond in the rough for us. It's one of the reasons why we have this platform. So,
right.
to bring you guys forth so we can get that knowledge, we can get that blessing. I want to ask you because you said a few things that just popped out in my head. You talked about at one time the teachers they weren't even allowed to teach in Charleston. They had to go
Right,
to the Sea Islands to teach.
right,
And then you also talked about the connection with Dr. Lorenzo Doe Turner, with South Carolina State University, and the discovery of the dialect for
right,
himself. The discovery, quote
right.
unquote. But it led and opened up these studies. I want to ask you, Orangeburg is of course in the Midlands. Some would say that the eastern part is in the Low Country area. The central part is in the Midlands. You say
Yeah,
that the western part is in the Central Savannah River
right.
area. So you can kind
Yeah,
of Orangeburg kind of lays across that southern part.
it's in
Um,
the center almost, but it's the upper part of the low country.
right,
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
right.
So it's almost
So
like the low country, when you get into that Barnwell and Orangeburg County areas,
hmm
there's still a heavy Gullah. And most people don't realize that if you listen to James Brown, he's actually born in Barnwell County.
Right.
When James Brown used to say, "Look at ya," you know, he was
Yeah,
speaking Gullah, and he
yeah.
was carrying it around the world. But
hmm
the accent is still very deep when you hit that Orangeburg, Barnwell County area. So you're almost halfway through the state.
So being that it has the cultural heritage connection, the continuum, would you connect that with lineages? Is it because the people are actually relatives?
Yeah, but yeah, what happened is of course, Charleston was. Most people don't realize this. I'm gonna tell y'all something, but it's important. When Charleston was founded, it was 1670, and that King of England, King Charles II, he had actually been overthrown and lost his throne just before that in the early 1600s, And these guys, these 8 guys, helped him. Well, 8 guys that he ended up giving the grant to, they helped him get back on the throne. And so he granted them this area called Carolina Province, as a kind of a reward for helping him. And the Carolina Province, the place they found it was Charleston, South Carolina, was the capital. But Carolina Province went from southern Virginia to northern Florida, and from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's basically the entire what they call the Deep South.
Yeah.
The deep
So
South, right?
Charleston was the capital of the whole area. Now later on, of course, France and Spain started chopping into some of that area, like Mexico and things in Louisiana. But Charleston was the capital of everything across that South. So those early records for all of that stuff is in Charleston, in the old fireproof building. If you notice, when Charleston moved, those southern states followed. Charleston was the first, they did the secession convention in Charleston. South Carolina seceded, her daughters followed. First shots was fired starting the war, her daughters followed. So Charleston's been very influential in the European part of American history, but it was also the premier slave port in the United States. So it's like a ground zero to the African American part of the history.
That's right.
So they believe close to 50%, like 40-something% of all Africans coming into these colonies in the United States came through Charleston, and they believe 85 to 90% of all African Americans in the United States have an ancestor that came through Charleston. So Charleston kind of connects, everything. But it's that white history and that black history growing up together and interacting the entire time. With Denmark Vesey noticed when he was first brought to Charleston as a slave, he actually started looking around and just noticing, man, this place is like predominantly black. And all the work that's being done, everything that's running the city is being done by these black folks. All they have to do is organize. And so that's what we planned the slave revolt. It was off of observation. So, like I said, that culture around there, of course, we're going through some gentrification right now. And, some nature stuff will have to take place, to kind of reverse that. But, of course, we were growing up through the 60s and 70s. That civil rights movement and integration caused what they call white flight, where when they told them that they had to go to school with black kids, a lot of those white families built those suburbs in the outside of the city and built schools out there and fled and pretty much left the city mostly to us. And so when I was growing up, Charleston was predominantly black, and by the time I was leaving Charleston, you could start to see some of the shift. They were trying to bring people back and push other people out. But the whole time that I was actually living there and growing up there, it was a completely different city.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, they're doing the International African American Museum over there now. And I actually watched all of Charleston's real black institutions be born, because it came out of that civil rights era. King was killed in 1968. The last significant event or victory of the civil rights movement was what they called the hospital workers strike in Charleston. That was in 1969, the year after King died. So his widow and, all the guys like John Lewis and Abernathy and all those guys came down. And when they ended up getting that victory, the civil rights movement pretty much fizzled out, and all the things that they won started in the 1970s. And so in Charleston, I believe the earliest institution was the Avery Research Center. That was the old African American school started in 1865. They shut it down in 1954. And it's very interesting that they shut that school down in 54, because that was the Brown versus the Board of Education decision year, when they said that the Supreme Court said it was illegal to segregate. When I was traveling the state, I noticed something that was strange, because they really didn't have mandatory integration until 1970. They started experimenting with it in the 60s. Now, the decision happened in 54. They started experimenting with 1 or 2 children at a time in the early 60s, but they didn't have mandatory integration until 1970. But for Avery, Avery closed in 54, which was the same year of the decision. And I was always wondering about that until I started traveling. I found a school called Bettis Academy that's in the Edgefield County, Aiken County area. And they had closed in like 56. And then there was another school, Coulter, in that Cheraw area where Dizzy Gillespie's from. They closed in the 50s. And so I was saying, well, why did some of these black schools close in the 50s and other ones didn't close until late 60s or whatever when they started integrating?
Mm-hmm.
And what I found out was that Avery was what they call a normal school, which means they had 2 years after you finished high school where they trained you to be a teacher. So Avery was training black teachers, and they had this curriculum where they were training black teachers for excellence. And then they would send those black teachers to rural communities all over the state to put the Avery stamp on those schools. You could have a one-room schoolhouse with a drafty ceiling, but if you got one of those excellent teachers that's telling you about black history and excellence, then you're still teaching the kids what they need to know to overcome their circumstance. So when they ended up integrating, what the first thing they wanted to do was to shut down the teacher factories. Because Bettis Academy had a 2-year accredited junior college that had teacher institutes, and they were in a different part of the state. And then Coulter was upstate, and they had a 2-year program where they were training teachers. So in the 50s, they shut down all the black teacher factories that were creating these teachers that were putting these excellent stamps on, because they were going to any community, but they were carrying what they knew into that community. And telling those kids, it doesn't matter where you're born, we can elevate your mind. And then we can elevate your mind can get you out of the circumstance. So they wanted to shut that down. So they got rid of those schools first.
Right. Wow. Brother Wayne, I want to shift it a little bit to Aiken because in researching you, I came to know about more details about what happened in Norway. Not Norway, but including Norway. But Ellington, Norway, and Hamburg. These areas, because we often hear about the Orangeburg Massacre in the 1960s, but we don't hear about the legacy of African resistance in that particular region. And I was reading about the railroad. At one time, the longest railroad in the world was from Charleston to Hamburg.
Right.
And just looking at how Hamburg is right there along the Savannah River. So you could use the river, you could use the land, or you could use the rail.
Yeah.
Either way, I can see how it became a very central area. I wanted you to touch on that area in terms of the political fight. Like today, we say Black Power. Back then, they may not have said that, but it was definitely a fight for Black Power, particularly during Reconstruction and some of the repression that we met, and the role that educators played within that, if you can.
Yeah, what's interesting, and that has Gullah Geechee roots to it as well. When Charleston was first founded on the coast, so shortly after that, they wanted to get an inland market. And that's where, the Hamburg area is kind of inland market. If you understand that whole history, the way it goes is Spanish used to be Florida used to be a Spanish-held territory.
Mm-hmm.
And so Spain and England was always at war with each other. Now, Charleston was the richest city in the United States at the time, because of all that, slave trade, Carolina gold, rice, all that kind of stuff. And so people in Charleston that were being brought into Charleston were trying to escape to get the freedom. They were going south, not north, because northern states colonies had slavery at the time too. Wasn't that double thing. But the Spanish said, if you can make it here, we'll give you your freedom. So you had people running away from Charleston trying to get to Florida. Mm-hmm. Remember, all this was Carolina colony at one time, all the way to Florida. And so what they did is in 1733, I believe, they created a new colony that became the last state in the United States, Georgia. And they were putting a buffer colony between Charleston and Florida. And it served as a double thing. If you escaped in Charleston, you had to get across Georgia where they can capture you and send you back before you can get to Florida for freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Or if the Spaniards wanted to attack Charleston, they could fight them in Georgia, and stop them, because they were always trying to protect Charleston. That's how valuable Charleston was to the crown.
Yeah.
Okay, so when Hamburg was now what happened in Georgia, once they created it, it became a separate state. Once it used to be a part of Carolina, now it's two states. So now they're going to have some competition going back and forth. When Georgia was actually first created, there was no slavery was illegal. They had that from the beginning. It was illegal. But the people in South Carolina could just jump over the bridge, buy some land in Georgia, and bring their workforce across the river. So the Georgians started complaining that we can't compete with the Carolinians because they got this free labor, and they're bringing them over here. And they're saying we don't own them over here, we just bringing them over here. And so in 1750, the crown told Georgia, now y'all can have slavery too. And so that's when slavery started there. But they had a free black community always in Georgia because they had those people that was free before they instituted slavery, that they didn't enslave once they instituted it. They just stayed free. So they've always had that. Charleston had a big free black community as well. So Charleston is the central thing. In Savannah, they wanted an inland market. They created Augusta. Hamburg is directly across from Augusta. It's North Augusta today, but it's in South Carolina. So Charleston had an inland slave port, and Savannah had an inland slave port. Augusta and Hamburg right across from each other. So they were competing. If you could get all the goods that were coming down from upstate South Carolina and North Carolina, if they come into that Hamburg, Augusta area, if Augusta could steal it, they could send it to Savannah to get shipped out. If Charleston could steal it, they could send it over, to Charleston to ship it out. So they were kind of in competition. They used to just have that river, but the river was, sometimes the water would be too low for the boats to go down, and sometimes it'd be just a raging flood. So Charleston didn't want their commerce to be interrupted. So Charleston merchants said, hey, we're going to build a railroad from Charleston to Hamburg. So whatever the river does, we can still ship this stuff on the railroad. And so, the guy's name was William Aiken. That's where Aiken in Aiken County comes from, the president of the railroad company. His name was William Aiken. His house is on King Street in Charleston. And matter of fact, his son was the governor. But so they built that railroad. It was 136 miles, the longest railroad in the world at the time, from Charleston to Hamburg. So that's where Hamburg kind of first starts to come into the picture. Now, after slavery ended, Hamburg became like it was a ghost town in the 50s. It kind of declined. And so by the time slavery ended, there was a town that didn't have any people in it. And there was a whole bunch of people that didn't have a town of their own. So a lot of freedmen ended up moving into Hamburg, which is almost a ghost town, resurrecting it, and kind of, so their officers were always about 70-80% black, the town officers. And the population was usually about 80 to 90% black. So Hamburg had this new life after the Civil War. And then in 1871, because the mayors, the wardens and things like that. So in 1871, they created Aiken County, these African Americans. And when they created Aiken County, they made sure they put Hamburg in Aiken County, this new county, so that they would have this, they could start this power structure from the beginning without dealing with some of the old school things from the other counties. And so when the Civil War ended, Confederates lost, all their, because the slaves were worth more than everything else they owned.
Yeah.
So they pretty much lost their wealth when they lost those people. And so when they looked at Hamburg, because the whole state was 60% black, mainly because of what was coming in through Charleston, they finally got their right to vote. And in the first election after the Civil War ended, African Americans won 60% of the seats in the state house. So it's the only state in the history of the United States that's ever had a majority black state house. So once these guys got these rights, they realized that there was no way they were ever going to win any more elections in South Carolina because the numbers weren't there. And so they decided that they were going to stage this massacre that they began at Hamburg, and then when they left Hamburg, they were going to go to different places because they wanted to overturn what they call Negro rule in South Carolina. And all this period was called Reconstruction. Reconstruction, if you look at an old history book, the same one that my great grandmother had in her school, it calls Reconstruction the darkest day in South Carolina history. Now, remember now, these books are in the black schools and the white schools because they only had one textbook that they wrote that they put in those schools.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a black kid and you read Reconstruction was the darkest day in South Carolina history, that's the time when you got freed. That's the time when you got your rights. That's the time when you got an opportunity to vote. And they call it the darkest day in South Carolina history. You know, they making, because you have to learn this. This is what you have to put on a test to get the grade.
Right.
So you have to have some black teachers telling you, okay, y'all got to put this stuff down here because if y'all don't pass this, you're not going to the next grade. But y'all don't have to believe this. They had to teach you outside of school what the truth was, even though. But now, if you didn't have a teacher that was doing that, you believed it. So you believe the first time we're free is the worst time in the state. First time we got rights is the worst time in the state.
Wow. Wow.
You know, I mean, the psychology. My mom was also a certified psychologist, so they was always teaching us how to think. You know, true education is teaching people how to think. Indoctrination is telling them what to think.
Right.
And when we went to school, they were telling us what to think. If you had a true educator, they'll teach you how to think and how to question things. You know, no question was a bad question if you really was trying to get an answer. And my grandparents and great grandparents didn't mind you questioning, but it better be something you really don't play around with it. If you're looking for an answer, ask the question. And if we don't know the answer, we encourage you to seek it out. You know, go out there and seek it out, because if you seek things out, you'll find them if you're really looking for them. You know, so that's kind of I say there's a lot of advantages coming through that tri-generational upbringing I had, because they was on the same page. They were studying, you know, Egyptian history and sciences, and so they were studying different. They didn't mind looking into different religions like Islam and all. Even though they were Christians, they didn't mind studying all those other things and reading African American history and things like that. So they weren't narrow-minded, because a lot of people, we had Christians that were narrow-minded. Anything that wasn't just in that Bible.
Sounds like they was very African-centered. They was very They understood that we were black people, and they understood that the black people needed a black education.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes absolute sense.
My grandfather spent a lot of time in New York during the Harlem Renaissance, because he was from Cheraw, which is Dizzy's hometown, and him and Dizzy grew up together. And so he's one of those jazz guys, my grandfather. He's a principal, but he was also like a jazz legend down there in Charleston. His brother, Charles Litton, went to New York in 1920s. First person he met up there was Eleanor Fagan, who's Billie Holiday, who was, you know, we know her as Billie Holiday. And he became the lead singer for the Chick Ware band. Chick Ware was like the top drummer during the Harlem Renaissance. And my grandfather's brother, Uncle Charles, was the lead singer. And when they asked him to find a female for the swing era, when the tempos started coming up in jazz, he actually went and got this 15-year-old homeless girl named Ella Fitzgerald and brought her on. So he's responsible for bringing Ella Fitzgerald on. So since he's up there in the Harlem scene and the jazz scene, when my grandfather would go up to visit him, that was his older brother, he would take him to all the jazz clubs. My grandfather would sit in and play with him. In the evenings, all of the intellectuals, because up in New York, remember, they had been free for a long time up in the North. You had educated black people in the North. The South had the culture. So when the people from the South would go to the North, they brought that culture up there, and it mixed with those guys in the North, you know, the poets and the writers, and that's what blew up the Harlem Renaissance. So my grandfather was an educator as well as a jazz guy. So he'd go up to New York and, you know, sit in and play with those guys. During the day, they would go hang out with the intellectuals and study. So whenever you would come home, he'd bring all these books, you know, from New York, because everything was coming from around, from the African diaspora into New York, you know, and so he would bring all these books back and read these books. So, like I said, by the time I came around, the way they thought, the way their minds were open to all these things, they were just putting that into us,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Oh yeah. Pouring it into you, bro. Just giving
Yeah.
it to you. Baba, you have anything?
Well, to shift course one more time, I just want to ask you another question. I think you made a trip to Africa recently. Can we hear something about that? Your
Yeah,
trip?
my most recent trip was I was over in Zanzibar. And
Okay.
you know what I learned over there was interesting because we always talk about Africa and well the slave trade from the West African perspective because that's where they took our people from. It was closer to, you know, to the eastern part of the Americas and you know Europe. So Europeans would come down, hit that western coast. They can get you through that door, no return, and put you on that boat. There's no getting off that boat till you're in that other place. But they had a slave trade in East Africa, and it was going over to you know Arabia and India and things like that. And on Zanzibar, Zanzibar was kind of the hub. You know, once they get you off the coast, because Zanzibar is an island right off the coast. They get you maybe in Central Africa, like the Congo area. And instead of taking you west, they take you east. And so I was saying, man, they were taking our people from all over. You know, just taking
All
you
over,
to
man.
different places. Now, it
Oh,
was strange about it. What I learned that I never knew this. I didn't know they had a slave trade over there. But we went to the dungeons in the capital, and they got church on top of it. You know, they used to build these churches down there. But the way the East Africans worked, if they move you out of Zanzibar to Arabia or India, the trip is only going to take a couple of days by boat, which means that you're not going to have a middle passage experience where a bunch of people die on the boat. You know, because with us, you might lose a quarter of people coming across the
yeah,
ocean. You know,
yeah.
packed in there like sardines for 3 or 4 months. You know, in East Africa, the dungeons were designed and created to weed out the weak, where you would die in the dungeon before they shipped you out if you were weak. So they had it was like the ceilings were real low, the ventilation was terrible, and all kind of thing. Once we put you in here, if you can survive being in here for a few weeks, then you're strong enough for us to sail.
Man,
And in West Africa, the weaning out kind of thing was on the boat. We just capture
Right.
a bunch of people, put you on the boat, and only the strongest is going to survive that journey. You know, the rest of them are thrown into the ocean, you know, because they didn't make it. So they had these processes where only the strongest of the strong genetically survived, which is what I tell young people. As bad as all that story is, there's a silver lining because if you standing here talking to us now, that means
Yes.
your ancestors survived and they were amongst the strongest of the strong. And they passed those genes on to you so that no matter what you meet in this new experience, you have the strength to
To handle it.
overcome it and make it. Now, the danger is, and we see it in our culture, if we can turn y'all against each other.
Mm-hmm.
You see, nothing else outside can destroy you, but if we can get into your heads
We
or
got you.
put stuff into your community that'll make you turn on each other. Because see, if I put a bunch of liquor stores and a bunch of crack, and then I build a housing project and put thousands of y'all guys right on top of each other, put all this volatile stuff in the community, the minute something jumps off, you kill or you hurt the people that's closest to you. You don't travel across town to go and find somebody to hurt. You know, you lash out right there.
Yeah,
And
proximity.
so, you know, you start seeing us turning our strength against each other and neutralizing each other. So these are things that have been put in us artificially, but we have to teach it out of us, you
That's
know.
right.
And until from these platforms like this, you know, we got to get a hold of our people and actually teach this out of them. And then after that point, they'll be okay. But until we can get that root stuff out of them, that the root of what causes us to hate each other, you know, by systems set up to make us turn on each other, then we gonna always be out fighting a losing battle until we can get in here and reprogram all that stuff.
Right. I wasn't aware that you was in Zanzibar. Heard it's very, very nice out there. But I seen that you was in Kemet. I seen that you had been in Kemet as well. Can you talk about that experience as well? I haven't been there yet.
That was my. I always tell people that was my dream trip to always go to. Because I studied it for years, and so when I went there, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to read the Greeks call it hieroglyphics, but the native Cometians, they call it Medu Neter, which is the words of the gods. And so I've been studying, how to read. So I wanted to go there and actually get into the temples and read. But one place I always wanted to go is I wanted to go inside the Great Pyramid into the King's Chamber. I wanted to get in there because I knew it was never meant to be a tomb. Because the way they did tombs, they would have things written in there, for the deceased to read. There's nothing in the pyramid. It's just the structure of it. And that's a whole study in itself what that monument is. But when I went inside, it's very difficult to get to the top. And they designed it that way. When you walk in, the opening might be 3 feet high by 3 feet wide, which means that you're going to have to go in there bent over. And then you're going to be going on like a 40-degree incline going up, for a few hundred feet, bent over. And when you're going up, other people's coming down. It's only like 3 feet wide too now. And there's, millions and millions of blocks that weigh tens of thousands of tons apiece. So there's, you can't even put the number on the amount of pressure that's coming down on that building. Now, with all that pressure, because you think about an amphitheater when they want the acoustics to go a certain way. All right, so you got millions of pounds of pressure all around you, and you're going through this thing, and you can feel it, but the stone's keeping them back. It's almost like it's a dance of what's trying to push down on you, and the stone's keeping them back. All right, once you get through this bent over period, you get into the grand gallery. It's still on that same incline, but all of a sudden it opens up. It's about 30 feet high. So I just went through this thing 3 feet high. Now I can stand up, but the roof is huge, and and this got the way it's diagrammed and everything. So you got to go through that for another, few hundred feet going up. And just before you get to the King's Chamber, they make you bend down again. And it's like two things there. You bend down to get under it and stand up in the center and bend down again. And you come up here in the King's Chamber. So all this journey to get there is testing a lot of things about you. Because they'll tell you, if you don't think you can do this, don't even try to go in there. You have to buy a ticket to go visit the pyramid. You have to buy a second ticket to go in. Because they tell a lot of people, you don't want that second ticket, if you're claustrophobic or anything like that. And I was saying no, but I spent my whole life wanting to get in here, so I'm going in this thing. I get into the King's Chamber. I hear you. And all of that pressure is bearing down the King's Chamber. And what I found out, I realized it's a spiritualization machine, that pyramid. It's designed to spiritualize you. When we went in there, they were talking about, because you don't want to talk loud, there's a lot of people in there. But if you think about acoustics, this chamber is built almost like what the Holy of Holies would have been in the temple. Yeah. It's a block about that size. With all that pressure coming down on that chamber, if you say one word, especially a chant, it'll leave your mouth, hit the wall, bounce off that wall, hit the ceiling, bounce off the ceiling, hit another wall, go through people, go through you, your voice, hit the wall. And then, so when people are talking, if you're in there during a service and you're chanting, and that stuff is just going through there, that stuff starts vibrating your body. Sounds, things like that is vibrating your body. And it starts to spiritualize you. It starts to almost change your structure from material to spiritual. And we couldn't go through the whole exercises in there, but I realized speaking in there and what was happening, that's what that was designed for. So like I said, that was the main place I wanted to go, because I wanted to experience it. I didn't want to just go see it. I wanted to experience it. And so, like I said, that was my But I've been to, wanted to go see the Sphinx, the Step Pyramid. One of the earliest ones, and to go to the early areas, go in the temples and read everything, because that's basically, if you look at West African history, you're going to see a lot of the teaching coming out of Kemet.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Because Kemet had these invasions by the Greeks and the Romans, and a lot of those guys left and ended up in West Africa. So on most of the traditions, you're going to hear about ancestors that had come out of Kemet, and you will see some of the teaching that made it into West Africa as well. So that was the root place I wanted to go.
That's cool.
Absolutely. You touched on briefly about Aiken being like a Black Power base at one point during Reconstruction. Can you talk about the events that led to the actual massacre?
The massacre, yeah. If you look at the story, because there was an incident first, then it came back 4 days later and turned into the massacre. They were trying to do it earlier, but it happened. It jumped off on July 4th, 1876. Now, the interesting thing is, when I first moved to this area, this is how I uncovered the larger story, is because I said, man, that's a very coincidental date for something to just happen, because 100 years earlier, on July 4th, 1776,
that's right,
the country was born. So I said, that sounds like a date they picked to do this. And then when I looked into it, of course, that was because they had a black militia, and on the 4th of July, they were going to, have a program, and they were out there drilling in the streets, and these two white guys tried to ride through their formation. Now, when I did my research, I realized that they had planned that they were going to do that. They knew the militia would be in the street. This is the perfect time for us to start an incident that we can say escalated and turned into what they call a riot, but it really was a massacre. They had planned it the whole time. And so, like I said, the date was the first thing. They're in the middle of Reconstruction. They can't figure out how to take the state back from black control. So they come up with this plan of how we're going to start something, kill as many blacks as necessary, and steal the election. A lot of what you saw January 6th, that basically was, when Hamburg happened, 1876, there was an opportunity then to do the right thing. So I think about 70-something people were indicted, but they never went to trial. And when they stole the election, basically sat at the polling places with guns to make sure black people didn't vote. And then they told, every white citizen that was armed that he had a duty to control the vote of at least 2 black people. That means make sure 2 of them don't go to the polls by any means necessary. If you can threaten them, if you can threaten their family, if you can beat them, or if you got to kill them, just make sure 2 black people don't get to the polls. He said, I don't care if you do more than 2, but at least 2. That's for every white citizen, every white male to do that. It's called the plan of the Edgefield plan, or the shotgun plan. So by the time the election comes at the end of 1876, they find out in the Edgefield County and a couple other counties, there were thousands more votes than there were people. So they knew that they stuffed the ballot boxes and everything. They ended up stealing the election, throwing these black folks out of office, then rewriting the laws and the Constitution that started to disenfranchise to make sure they never came back. So if they had tried those guys for murder and convicted them, it would have set a precedent that you can't go murdering innocent people and get away with it. But when they didn't try them and didn't do anything, it set the precedent that yes, you can do this and get away with it. And then we watched it all through the civil rights movement. We watched it, Black Wall Street with Oklahoma, that came after Hamburg, Rosewood, all that stuff came after. Hamburg set a precedent that you can murder these black people and nothing be done. And then, of course, with the Emmett Tills and Medgar Evers and all those guys, all through that movement, you saw all these people murdering black folks. The bombing of the church with the 4 little girls, where no white person had ever been convicted for killing a black person. They started trying to go back and retry these people in the 90s, after they was old. But that set us back, 100 years, because once they overturned Reconstruction, it took us a civil rights movement to get back in the 1960s what they had in the 1860s. I got my great-great-great-grandparents' voting registrations from the 1860s. But my great grandmother, my grandfather, and my mother couldn't vote again until the 1968 election because the 65 Voting Rights Act passed.
Wow.
So they were getting something back that their ancestors, three generations, four generations before, had the luxury to do. So that tells you Hamburg set us back. That's why we're putting so much focus on Hamburg, because it's the
Yeah.
spot in the time where the history was turned back and set us back 100 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was the spark right there. I've seen it like
Yeah.
that as well.
So we're creating
Brother,
a Hamburg
brother,
historic district in this area,
yeah,
to make sure there's stories and monuments that's telling that history.
right. Brother Damon Fordham, he wrote a book about,
Yeah,
you know, about a lot of the incidences around Reconstruction, and
yeah,
definitely he had the opportunity to be on the platform, first actually, and
right.
he talked about that briefly as well. We're running out of time. For the sake of time, I would like for you to leave us with some last words for sure. Give us some inspiration, man. This has been a a great treat for me, and I'm sure for our viewers as well, who've been able to be here today and who will come after this show is live and check it out. What's your last message for us, brother?
Well, my last message is that everybody, we need all hands on deck. We got, remember I told you, with us, you have a small amount of people that's trying to wake up a large, giant community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially when you're talking in terms of the diaspora, where people don't realize that people in South America are our blood. People on the continent are our blood, because we've been sent a little bit of everywhere, but there's not enough of us that's telling the story. So what we have to do is make sure that we are training an army of people to tell the story, to spread the word. Because you start with one person. If each person can teach a few hundred, and those guys get, empowered to go out and teach more. But one thing that is a warning: we have to always have to make sure we're teaching the truth. Because the
Yes.
way social media is now, it's almost like everybody can get on there and say what they want, but they're not backing it up with facts. And now the next generation is getting confused. They're accepting stuff that's not. If a black lie is just as bad as a white lie, we need to
Yeah,
tell the truth. So we
yeah,
don't need to make stuff up, because our history is so great that we don't have to make nothing up for it to sound good. We can just tell the truth. So that's my thing. Just stick to the facts of our history. That thing will stand up against anybody's history and come out on top.
Exactly. Exactly. That's great.
absolutely.
But
So,
I appreciate you guys having me. Let me get that in before we get off. I appreciate y'all having me. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime. I know Brother Fordham, actually, he went to school under my grandfather when my grandfather was the principal. But he's doing some great work down there in Charleston.
all right, yeah, man, that's dope, man. We appreciate you, bro. It's only an hour, man, but the show is here. We can get you back anytime. If you have any upcoming events, anything people could look out for,
Let us know.
now is definitely time to plug it, because we're gonna spread this. We're gonna spread this and spread this and
Yeah.
spread this to make sure that people start getting this education properly.
Okay, well, yeah, I have a radio program every Tuesday called Our History Matters. It's 7 to 8 on WWAAW
Yeah.
94.7. I think you can get it online. But
Well, we can catch it
in
here.
April, I know we're going to focus a lot on jazz, because April is Jazz Appreciation Month, and we do a thing called Jamberg. It's a play on the name Hamburg.
I like that.
Jam in the area, and we just the roots of jazz is out of African music, and then it came into the slave ports. So jazz birthplace is really in Charleston and Louisiana, and New
Mm,
Orleans. Most people thought of it as New Orleans, but we had the Jenkins Orphanage as a jazz nursery in Charleston. So they kind of blew up at the same time. And then how jazz went north and started the Harlem Renaissance. Then when they made it big in the north, they came back to the south and played the chitlin circuits. So we tell that whole story, African roots into the slave ports, traveling north to
mm,
become big, coming back south to play in front of my own people. and then try to do a research so people can understand what it really is. The spiritualization of African music infused into this kind of it's almost like it's a Gullah. It's African music that was fused with European instruments, and became this Gullah version of music. So that we'll be doing that all April. And so you should see some things, and we'll do the Jamberg Festival at the end of the month.
All right, so y'all heard it, Jamberg. Hey, Baba, you gonna be out there?
I'm gonna try to, man, but I've been meaning to catch your show. I know it comes on Tuesday nights,
right?
And I've been meaning to catch it. I know it's on the gospel station here, so I'll get to listen to it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Matter of fact, this coming Tuesday is going to be From Whence We Came. So I'm gonna be dealing with the West African civilizations before the slave trade. So the first few shows were always setting the foundation that our history didn't begin with slavery. So I've been teaching about the African continent the first few shows, and I did Kemet and East Africa and things that in the technological things that they started, that the Greeks took credit for, things like that. And then I'm going to bring it over into West Africa coming, but it's going to be the civilizations before the slave trade, so that they can see what they were before that stuff was interrupted by that transatlantic slave trade.
I say. Well, I'm looking forward, man. Just like Baba said earlier, you are a griot. Here in the Manding language, we say Jelly.
Yeah,
you are a historian. You are Baba. You are a big brother. We appreciate you, and definitely want to have you on the platform. There's no way we could actually be authentic without working with those who actually are the authorities. And we appreciate you so much, brother. So we're gonna let you out of here for now. Close out the show, and we'll be in contact with you because that Jamberg thing is something that we definitely can help push.
Okay. Yeah. Matter of fact, especially from the African music standpoint.
Yes, sir.
We're gonna put a big focus on that starting out. Yeah.
All right, brother. Thank you very much.
Great
brother.
show. Great show.
Peace, brothers.
Peace.
All right. Live. But I just want to thank you as well, man. Another good showdown. And in closing, look down here. Give a contribution to our 6th annual Tools and Seeds fundraising drive. Very, very important. The Gullah Nation of North America, our community organization. This is our Gullah House media platform on YouTube, and this is our Gullah House Show. So if you can, support the work that we're doing in Sierra Leone, growing some food. I know we got some things that we would like to do down here in Orangeburg, and we got a brother over in Detroit actually from down the Aiken area who got some farming going on up there. Baba Darryl Orange is down there in St. Helena. It's farm season, y'all, and so we're calling for your support so we can help farm in 2 different villages this year. So don't forget about that, and remember, next time, not next Sunday, the Sunday after the next, April 9th, we have Lori Johnson. She will introduce herself properly to everybody. Because,
she will.
Yes, the Queen Mother has been going through evolutions and transforming and reaching new heights. And we know her most popularly as Lori Johnson, but she will be doing a complete new introduction to the community. At least here on this platform, so we can get it right, and get it proper. She'll be representing the Igala Nation of the U.S. Of course, we have Africans coming from all over the continent into Charleston, including those from the Igala Nation, the Igala people of Nigeria, and they've done great work to reconnect and make sure that we have these various connections. So, Baba, any last words before we get up out of here?
Oh, I just want to say this was a very informative show. I enjoyed it immensely. Thank you, Brother Wayne. We'll be in touch, and check us out. We'll be back the following, not next Sunday, but the following Sunday.
Oh yeah. You heard it, Jamberg. It's going down.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna be sure to tune in and check out the brother.
Yeah, don't forget the name, Wayne O'Brien. O'Brien. Yeah, right here, Gullah House Show.
They call him the keeper of the torch.
Get with that brother. You want the right information? Get with that brother. We coming back with more, and it would be wrong for us to close this particular show out and not give a shout out to Dr. Who?
Walter Curry.
That's right. Dr. Curry gave us, Dr. Walter Curry gave us the connection to Brother Wayne, and for us, myself and Baba, it's just encouraging to have the brothers, accept our contribution as well and come and bless our platform. We really appreciate y'all, and we really look forward to working with y'all closer and more offline, right there in the community, getting this information to our people. All right. So
Yes,
with that said, we say many roots,
one bamboo.
That's right. We love y'all.
All right.